What did scientists think about aging in 1931? That's right, 1931, because this is the year the first biological textbook was published, The Science of Life. Written by H.G.Wells, Sir Julian Huxley and G.P.Wells, the book itself is composed of multiple books, and last year I bought the first book and I read it. And having enjoyed it so much and discovered that it was part of this massive ensemble piece, I managed to get my hands on the first edition of this textbook. This was my face when I first received it. As you can see, I was quite excited. And so far I've only read the first book, called The Living Body. And in this book, the authors discuss the body as a machine, and that for the present, it is enough to remember that all animals, including men, are combustion engines of an intricate and curious kind, which live by oxidising their food. Now, besides being surprised to find out that H.G. Wells wrote not just non-fiction, but biology non-fiction, I was also surprised to hear how both similar and dissimilar their views were back in 1931 compared to today, and I wasn't sure if that was good or terrifying. So, how did they think of human ageing back in 1931? Well, in the last chapter of this first book, titled The Wearing Out of the Machine and Its Reproduction, they discuss it. Here are the chapter's 5 main takeaways we will go through, and my updated opinions on them. So firstly, they already knew about factors in the blood. The authors describe that there seems to be an accumulation of poisonous substances in the blood. It has been shown that if a culture of healthy tissue from a growing chick be mounted in blood serum from a very old bird, the cells cease forthwith to divide and grow. Now, I tried searching for this paper. One unfortunate aspect of this textbook is that there are no references, but I can provide updated views today, and they are very much in line. It does seem that either there is an accumulation of pro-aging factors in the blood, or 2, a decline in anti-aging factors, or 3, both. In the book, they appear to be in support of the first idea, there's an accumulation of pro-aging factors. And current data that supports this view comes from research from the Comboy lab, which I presented before, whereby they diluted blood plasma of old mice and saw it rejuvenated the 3 tissue layers. But then, just the other month, I presented some preliminary evidence that perhaps the loss of youthful factors is also taking place, and injecting them back in rats, although this data hasn't officially been published yet, seems to be quite promising. And in a similar vein, this brings me on to the next point, where the authors then attribute circulatory defects to most causes of death. Now, obviously causes of death have changed over time, but regarding old age, they were somewhat spot on with the trends that we see today. In most cases of natural death in people over 50, the failure occurs in the circulatory system, the heart stops, or one of the stiffened arteries bursts, and all the other tissues perish because of the cessation of their blood supply. I like the way they phrase this cooperativity here. It is important to realise that our cells do not die because mortality is inherent in their vital structure. They die because they are part of a very complicated system based on cooperation, and sooner or later, one of the tissues lets the other down. So like with point 1, back in 1931, they really seem to emphasise the importance of the circulatory system. There's this famous quote, "A man is as old as his arteries," from Thomas Sydenham. I will assume it came from around 1670. And so if we know this to be true, why does it seem like I can say nothing smarter than what I have already, and that we still have the same viewpoint that the circulatory system is important? Anyway, another intelligent observation they made was that they were aware that aging affected tissues differently. There's an interesting review article, a recent one I should say, that goes into how the rate of aging varies depending on tissues, and the authors here in his book are in agreement. Different tissues dwindle away at different rates. And now there's even evidence from DNA methylation, a proxy for biological age, one potential way of measuring so-called biological age, that different tissues do indeed appear to show different rates of aging. This could hint at what tissues or organs would be most effective to target therapeutically. But interestingly, the authors describe in this book how the brain tissue goes more rapidly than the cerebral arteries, so that the latter, having their original length but a shortened course, become twisted into curious loops and spirals. Now, I did a little digging into this phenomenon, and it turns out if you could trace the brain vasculature at high resolution, you could use this as an early indication of brain decline. Could this be a predictive biomarker? What would be the most effective, non-invasive and cheap method to do this? I don't know, I'm just thinking out loud, but it's curious. Anyhow, now for the big question. What were their thoughts on immortality in 1931? Well, they thought immortality had potential. As a matter of fact, living matter is potentially immortal. They continue to say, death is a consequence of incomplete organisation. The tissues die because they are parts of an imperfectly balanced body. So how does one control balance? You could add or subtract something until it all sort of weighs up, which leads me to the fifth point, which is about hormones. Now, hormones, in my opinion, still seem somewhat underexplored. And guess what? They're also transported in the blood. The authors mentioned two men in this book, Steinach and Voronoff, who must have been known back then, but from my own research, were scientists/vets/doctors, not really sure entirely, that were trying to rejuvenate the human body. In particular, that took me down a somewhat disturbing rabbit hole that didn't involve rabbits, but guinea pigs, monkeys, and humans. And it was definitely interesting, but a little bit disturbing, and I haven't actually dug that deep yet. But essentially, Steinach was performing autoplastic surgery that involved sex gland vasoligation, some rewiring of the sex glands essentially, while Voronoff was pioneering heteroplastic surgery of sex gland transplantation, where the sex glands could come from alternative sources. Apparently there was some success, albeit only temporary, and sometimes there was no success at all. And frankly, if I haven't really found the literature for this, so if anyone has, please let me know. Although I don't know if I do want to go that deep into this rabbit hole. Anyhow, they both had the same view that rejuvenation could be triggered through addition of hormones coming from the sex glands. So a little bit speculative, in my opinion. And the book doesn't go into any details regarding this work. It more references the researchers suggesting that it was assumed knowledge at the time. Unfortunately, I was not around in 1931, so I do not know. And then this idea of hormones is just continued throughout the rest of the chapter. So to wrap up, they had a pretty good insight into the biology of humans, even back in 1931. And I think part of this is due to the fact that they were quite bold with their experiments, rigorous with their thought, and detailed with their descriptions. In fact, there are many beautiful, very detailed images in this book. I'll make another video when I've read the whole textbook, because I'm sure it will contain some nuggets of knowledge. It just may take me some time to read it. So for now, enjoy some other non-fiction books I've read. And to help to read some books of your own, you might like to have some branded bookmarks that I've designed. Otherwise, thank you to my Patreon supporters and thank you for listening.